At 19 years old, Ethan Brooks had mastered the art of pretending everything was fine. It was easier than explaining why he slept in his pickup truck, or why dinner usually came from a gas station, or why every morning began by folding a blanket before anyone noticed he had spent another night in a parking lot. 2 years earlier, his parents had died within weeks of each other. His father suffered a fatal stroke. His mother never recovered from the grief. Their small home was sold to cover medical debts. The relatives who promised to help slowly disappeared. By 19, Ethan had aged out of every favor anyone was willing to offer. He worked construction whenever jobs appeared. When they didn't, he survived however he could. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while replacing shingles on a warehouse roof, his phone rang. The caller identified herself as attorney Linda Harper. "I'm handling the estate of Eleanor Brooks." Ethan frowned. "My grandmother?" "Yes." He hadn't seen Eleanor since he was 12. She had become increasingly private during her final years. Almost nobody visited her. "I didn't know she passed. She left something specifically to you." 3 days later, Ethan sat inside a small law office. The attorney slid a single folder across the desk. Inside rested a property deed, a photograph, and an old brass key. "What is it?" "A townhouse." Ethan blinked. "My grandmother owned a townhouse. She owned it for 43 years. He stared at the photograph. The building looked unsettling. 3 stories tall, dark brick, boarded windows, iron fencing covered in vines. It looked abandoned, almost haunted. "I suppose nobody else wanted it." The attorney smiled slightly. "Actually," she hesitated. "Several people tried buying it before the estate settled." That surprised him. "Why?" "They never said." She handed him one final envelope. Across the front, in elegant handwriting, were 4 words. "Only open inside." The townhouse, set near the oldest neighborhood in the city. Most surrounding buildings had already been renovated. Coffee shops, luxury apartments, art galleries. Yet this one remained frozen in time. Weeds pushed through cracked sidewalks. Paint peeled from every window frame. The wrought iron gate barely opened. Ethan unlocked the front door. It groaned loudly. Dust floated through pale afternoon sunlight. The interior felt strangely untouched. Antique furniture remained perfectly arranged. Books filled every shelf. A grandfather clock still stood in the hallway. Everything looked as though Eleanor had stepped outside only yesterday. He slowly explored every room. The kitchen, the library, 3 bedrooms. Nothing seemed unusual, except every room felt meticulously maintained beneath the dust. No vandalism, no decay, just silence. That evening, Ethan finally opened his grandmother's letter. "If you're reading this, then you've already ignored the rumors." He smiled. Apparently people thought the townhouse was frightening. The letter continued. "Good. Fear keeps dishonest people away." Now she had his attention. "Stay here for at least 7 days. Do not sell. Do not accept any offers." That seemed oddly specific. The final sentence puzzled him most. "Begin with the basement." The basement? The next morning, Ethan carried a flashlight downstairs. Old storage shelves lined the walls. Boxes filled with family photographs. Christmas decorations. Old furniture. Nothing extraordinary, until he noticed one wall. Fresh mortar. Different bricks. Someone had repaired a section decades ago, yet it looked oddly deliberate. He tapped it. Solid. Then one brick sounded hollow. Very hollow. His pulse quickened. Using an old pry bar, he carefully removed it. Behind the brick rested a small iron lever. He hesitated, then pulled. A deep mechanical rumble echoed beneath the townhouse. Part of the basement wall slowly slid sideways. Cold air drifted outward. Beyond it stretched a narrow corridor. Stone walls. Iron lamps. The passage descended farther underground. Far deeper than the townhouse foundation should have allowed. Ethan grabbed another flashlight. Every instinct warned him to leave. Instead, he walked forward. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. He stopped breathing. Concrete reinforced the ancient stone walls. Steel shelving stretched into darkness. Industrial generators. Water filtration equipment. Storage rooms. It resembled a hidden underground headquarters. At the center stood a large oak table. A single envelope rested there. Across the front were 3 handwritten words. For Ethan. His hands shook. Slowly he opened it. The first sentence made his blood run cold. "If you've reached this room, then the people searching for this townhouse have probably found you already." Searching? Who? The next paragraph began explaining everything. Nearly 40 years earlier, Eleanor had uncovered evidence connecting several powerful real estate developers to fraudulent property acquisitions throughout the city. Entire neighborhoods had been stolen through forged deeds and shell companies. Rather than expose the documents immediately, she secretly purchased properties the developers desperately needed, including the townhouse. Then she built the hidden archive beneath it. Every original deed, every financial record, every fraudulent contract. Everything remained hidden underground, waiting for someone she trusted, waiting for Ethan. He turned the page. Another folder rested inside. Property maps, ownership records, historic surveys. Then a document slipped onto the table. Current trust valuation, $176 million. Ethan stared. $176 million. Not because of the townhouse itself, because the surrounding redevelopment district depended on properties controlled by Eleanor's trust. Before he could process another thought, a loud engine echoed faintly above. Then another. Then another. He hurried toward an old security monitor mounted on the wall. Miraculously, it flickered to life. Outside the townhouse, 3 black SUVs had just stopped at the front gate. 6 men climbed out, and they were already walking toward the front door. Ethan's pulse hammered. 3 black SUVs stood outside the townhouse. 6 men stepped onto the front porch. None looked like homebuyers. None looked interested in restoring an old building. They moved with military precision, like they had spent years searching for this exact address. Ethan turned back to his grandmother's letter. His hands trembled as he continued reading. If they've arrived, they finally discovered where I hid everything. He swallowed hard. The next sentence stopped him cold. The archive isn't the inheritance. He frowned. If the underground archive wasn't the inheritance, then what was? He continued reading. 40 years earlier, Eleanor Brooks had been an accountant for one of the city's largest redevelopment companies. While reviewing financial records, she uncovered a massive fraud. Entire neighborhoods had been targeted. Developers created shell corporations, forged ownership documents, bribed officials, then quietly seized historic properties before their true value became public. Rather than helping them, Eleanor copied every document. She resigned the next day. Knowing her life would be in danger, she secretly purchased several overlooked properties that controlled access to the redevelopment district. The boarded-up townhouse became the most important, not because it was beautiful, because ownership of it prevented the fraudulent development from ever becoming legal. She created a permanent trust, then hid every original document beneath the house, waiting for someone she knew would never sell for quick money. Ethan reached the next page. A professional valuation rested inside. Estimated trust value, $176 million. He stared silently. The trust controlled dozens of historic buildings across the district. The developers couldn't complete their project without them. That explained the purchase offers, and why they kept increasing. Above him came the sound of the front door splintering. The men were inside. He forced himself to keep reading. The trust transfers only to the Brooks heir who refuses the first offer. Ethan smiled despite everything. Without realizing it, he had already qualified. The next pages contained property deeds, trust agreements, historic surveys, financial records, every document carefully preserved. Then he noticed one final envelope. Smaller, addressed simply, "My dear Ethan." He opened it slowly. "If you're reading this, then life probably became much harder than I ever wanted for you." His throat tightened. "I wish I could have helped more openly, but anyone close to me became a target." He paused. For years he had wondered why his grandmother had become so distant. Now he understood. She hadn't abandoned him. She had protected him. The letter continued. "I watched you from farther away than you ever realized. When you lost your parents, I wanted to bring you here. But the people searching for these records were still watching." Tears filled his eyes. "Keeping my distance was the hardest decision I ever made." He wiped his face. The final paragraph read, "If you restored this house instead of selling it, then I chose correctly." A violent crash echoed through the underground corridor. The intruders had found the hidden entrance. Time had run out. At the bottom of the letter, Eleanor had written one final instruction: leave through the carriage tunnel. A blueprint showed a concealed exit behind the old water filtration system. Ethan grabbed the document case, packed every deed and journal into his backpack, then hurried toward the rear of the underground complex. Behind several steel tanks sat a hidden wheel. He turned it. A section of the stone wall slowly opened. A narrow tunnel stretched beneath neighboring buildings. Behind him came shouting. "They've been here. The documents are gone. Find him." Ethan entered the tunnel and pulled the emergency lever. The hidden doorway sealed behind him. The passage followed an old brick utility corridor nearly half a mile beneath the city. Eventually, it opened inside a restored carriage house hidden behind an abandoned church. The building looked ordinary from the outside. Inside, however, waited a desk, a satellite phone, fresh batteries, and another envelope. His grandmother truly had planned everything. Inside rested the business card of attorney Linda Harper. A handwritten note beneath it simply said, "Call immediately." Ethan dialed. The attorney answered before the second ring. "Ethan Brooks." His eyes widened. "You knew I'd call. We've been preparing for this day for almost 20 years. She explained that Eleanor created the Brooks Historic Preservation Trust decades earlier. The moment Ethan recovered the original documents, ownership transferred automatically. Legal protections activated immediately. State investigators, federal prosecutors, historic preservation authorities, all received notifications. The men inside the townhouse weren't preservation developers. They represented shell corporations connected to decades of fraudulent real estate acquisitions. Every forged deed, every hidden payment, every illegal transaction, every bribe. Eleanor had documented all of it. The archive beneath the townhouse contained enough evidence to unravel one of the largest property fraud schemes in the state's history. Within days, search warrants were issued. Corporate offices were raided. Several executives were arrested. Judges voided dozens of fraudulent property transfers. Historic buildings once believed permanently lost returned to their rightful owners. Months later, the Brooks Trust officially took control of the redevelopment district. Reporters expected Ethan to sell everything immediately. Instead, he surprised them. He restored every historic building. Affordable apartments filled previously abandoned homes. Local businesses received low-cost storefront leases. Old theaters reopened. Community gardens replaced vacant lots. Scholarship programs helped young adults who had aged out of foster care, just as Ethan once had. The boarded-up townhouse became the headquarters of the Preservation Trust, exactly as Eleanor had envisioned. 1 year later, Ethan unlocked the beautifully restored front door. The once creepy townhouse now glowed with warm light. The library had been preserved. The grandfather clock ticked again. Fresh flowers decorated the front windows. Families walked safely through streets that had once stood abandoned. The hidden archive still remained beneath the basement. Protected, untouched. A reminder of the woman who refused to surrender an entire neighborhood to greed. Ethan stood beside the old fireplace and looked around quietly. Everyone believed he inherited a frightening old townhouse. Others believed he stumbled into incredible wealth. Neither was entirely true. What his grandmother really left behind wasn't a fortune. It was responsibility. She entrusted him with an entire community, with its history, its future, and its people. The night he arrived, Ethan believed the townhouse would simply keep him off the streets. Instead, hidden beneath its basement waited the chance to rebuild not only his own life, but thousands of others. For a homeless 19-year-old who thought the world had forgotten him, that turned out to be the greatest inheritance anyone could ever receive.